Well, hi, another spatial short talk, and as you can see behind me, it's a Christmas tree. Getting close to Christmas, my favorite time of the year. So I get asked a lot by those in the finance and investment world about geospatial. I've never been asked so often about the lay of the land. Um, and I've got a long history in the industry. I mean, I'm going to really in this talk talk to those folks and anybody else interested, folks that are relatively new to the geospatial world, a little bit of history and a little bit of how things break down. So some dot connecting here. I've been in the industry 25 years. I've always kind of been on the cutting edge of the industry. So when I started working in GIS, going back to the 90s, I was actually building WebGIS applications in 1995. So a lot of people hadn't even heard of the web then. So I was, and then I set up a company when I first saw the iPad, and we started building mobile GIS applications, and we were doing a lot of offline work as well, which is where Web Map Solutions got kind of quite a lot of notoriety. That's probably not the right word. We got a lot of exposure because of that. And more recently, I've worked in remote sensing as well as GIS. So I have a pretty good rounded perspective on the industry, and I've been in it for a long, long time. So I think that's why I'm asked so often by the investment community and the finance world about how it lays out now and where it's going. So let me give you a little bit of background on it. And yeah, again, if you want to reach back to me and ask a deeper dive, more than happy to do it. But let me. I had a call this morning about this, so it's fresh in my mind. So let's just break it down. We hear a lot about this word spatial. I'm really interested in the world, in this emerging world of spatial computing, which Apple are talking a lot about, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about that. But spatial means place, basically. So it is something that has a place. It could be in the air, it could be on the ground. It's got a location of sorts. It occupies space. Geo means Earth. So spatial means, if you think about augmented reality, that's something that's floating in the air between you and the window over here. You know, it's occupying space. It's in your eye. So that's spatial. Geospatial means it has an address. So when we talk about the world of GIS, GIS has been a world that's focused on geospatial. So if you have a location, an object that has a location that has an actual address on Earth, then we are talking geospatial. If you're talking just something that takes up a location, then it's spatial. Spatial is the umbrella term that geospatial falls up into. So it's a subset. Geospatial is a subset of spatial. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, 50 years old, a long history. That is a stack, a technology stack, data and technology, which is part of geospatial. Place on Earth, geospatial, think of geospatial as place on Earth. Remote sensing, it's another geospatial discipline. It isn't GIS, it's a different sector. And there are other sectors that make up the geospatial industry. So don't think that the geospatial sector is GIS. GIS is a part of a bigger whole. So how do things break down in the geospatial sector? And that's where I'll focus my attention. There are really four parts to the pie. There's the data piece. There's now the analytical piece, which I'll put under artificial intelligence, even though that's not just the place that it is, but it's certainly a sector which is now part of the geospatial world. There's software, and there's platforms. I think it's fair to say that it breaks down into those four places. So what do those pieces look like, and who are the main players in there? Well, let's talk about data. So data includes IoT. That's more often not, that's real-time data. Data includes this whole space industry that's emerging, all these satellites that are being launched up with all these mini sensors on them. So they're collecting all this stuff from orbit, all this data from orbit. And it's it's different types of data. We can talk about that in a second. Let's go a little bit further below that. Again, this is kind of sitting in the remote sensing world where we're processing and analyzing data. So, yep, satellites, IoT, airborne, which includes fixed-wing aeroplanes, helicopters, drones. Then we got terrestrial data collection, which is vehicles driving. IoT kind of potentially fits in terrestrial. And you've actually got underground data as well that we're collecting. So That's the data. That's really the remote sensing world, where we're talking about collecting geospatial data and processing it. So there is a whole world of companies that are in that space. I used to work for MV5. They're in that space, mostly fixed wing data collection and processing, but they're broadening. Fugro is a Dutch-based company, same kind of thing. There's a whole load of companies that essentially build data products. So think of it, always use the analogy of the gas industry or the oil industry. You dig the oil up, you process the oil, and you put it in a gas station as a product that's put into a vehicle. That's essentially what we're talking about for a lot of these remote sensing companies. They're essentially doing that. And some of the stuff I work with historically was colored point cloud. So we fly a transmission line, we collect LiDAR, we process that LiDAR data, we color it based on vegetation, whether it's a threat or not to that transmission line. That's a data product. So that's that world of data. Now, artificial intelligence is relatively new. Algorithms that process data are not, but artificial intelligence is actually automating this. So there's a new set of algorithms, a machine learning, which allow us to basically automate some of the processes we're talking about here. So as we collect this massive data in the world of remote sensing, we're now processing that data by artificial intelligence. And we're doing some level analytics on that data as well. Analytics being coloring that point cloud that I just described. So we're not only processing it and making it usable, as in we put it in a gas station, it can be put into a car. You can't put raw oil into a car. Those data products, processing of that data is done by AI. And some of the analytics. There is also humans in the mix. Chunks of that work is still done by analysts that are using ArcGIS Pro, that are using these different desktop products to actually deliver something at the end of it. And we've jumped into software there, which I'm trying to avoid. So number one is the data collection and processing. AI is number two. There's a whole industry that's emerging, which is automating the process and analytics of that data. The third piece is what I just touched on is software. And there's desktop software like ArcGIS Pro. There's QGIS, which is an open source software product. Those are expert solutions that are multifaceted. They have lots of modules and things that you can do with them, but you need to be trained in those. So there's the whole world of GIS is really sort of centered around desktop products. There's a whole load of other solutions, which are point solutions, if you want to call them that, which are very focused on particular things. You know, a mobile application which is designed to do inspections. You can see that pole you need to inspect. You can report on what you did, and it goes. It's a GIS and a ERP system, or a sort of a work management system where that data is pulled from and pushed into. So there's some very specific solutions which can be installed, or more often than not, they're web-based solutions. So there's the world of software, and there's a whole load of providers in the software world as well. The fourth piece to that is platforms, and Esri is a really good example in the GIS world of a platform. So, you know, their world is about not just a single solution, but a multitude of solutions that sit on top of this base. So you've got the data that you've populated in Esri's world, and then you've got all these different tools, desktop solutions, web solutions, which you can access that data from. You can visualize the 2D maps, you can do analytics, etc. And more, and now you begin to go into the 3D world as well with that. So they're really the four sectors. And there's, again, I should mention Orbital Insight as one of the AI companies that are well known in that second group that I mentioned. So a lot of companies in each of those spaces. So each of them are competing in different spots against different organizations. So people get confused that the geospatial is this one homogenous thing. It's actually not. You know, a remote sensing company is competing more often than not with another remote sensing company. Is anybody competing with Esri? Not very many people are competing with Esri anymore, but they used to, in the GIS world, have competition. So what am I noticing as sort of a trend in the industry? Certainly the trends, AI is a trend, but in terms of the sort of business models, I'm beginning to notice that there's convergence of technology, i.e. GIS and geospatial is coming together, BIM and GIS are coming together. So these technologies are beginning to come together. And as a consequence, from a business model perspective, we're beginning to see companies acquire other companies in different sectors. So we're beginning to see remote sensing companies buy GIS companies. We're beginning to see geospatial AI and GIS and other remote sensing stuff come together in one place. So I think of it as like kind of the Tesla model. Tesla is sort of one package in everything. You don't have to go to a gas station anymore. Tesla comes, it's the car, it's the battery, it's even the charging stations as well. So it's this sort of one-stop shop for everything. And I'm beginning to notice that in the industry. Now, I think one of the things that one has to be careful with is there's been a lot of acquisitions in the geospatial world. So so funds have been buying a combination of different companies, bringing them together and trying to make this sort of this collection of companies. If that's done right, it'll be done really well. The other side of that is, and I worked for Hexagon Geospatial, they were very much an acquisition-based company. It's the motivation behind the acquisition is where I'm going to with that. So I think that the trend is towards kind of the Tesla model, everything under one roof. Whether the acquisitions are done with that in mind or whether they're done to increase share prices is a question. I don't know. Sometimes I've noticed that acquisitions are done just to pump up the share price. It wasn't done strategically. So I think those organizations which are looking to do this kind of thing and have a strategy around the reasons for why they're doing it and how that connects to all the other pieces will be incredibly successful moving forward. I think some will fail, and I've watched it in I won't name companies, but I've watched it where they didn't have a strategy and therefore none of those parts connected properly. So that's a trend I think is worth watching in the industry. As I look to the future, and I'm always doing that, I think that there's a lot of interesting things happening technologically at the minute. I'm particularly interested in augmented reality. I'm particularly interested in smart glasses. I'm particularly interested in generative AI. How does that, and so this is sort of the spatial computing world. How's that going to impact the geospatial world? So this is spatial to geospatial. How are those worlds going to work together? I think that my view on this is, and again, I'm projecting forward, is let's start with generative AI. ChatGPT has opened up the world to everybody to artificial intelligence. So everyone can now access directly artificial intelligence. We're beginning to see it feed out in other places, but we can now directly get access to it and do really clever things. And that's only going to continue. The geospatial world has been a difficult world to sell because it's been based around maps and it's been based around technology and data and the need for experts. Generative AI gives an interface to ask complicated location-based geospatial questions, like I always use the example site selection. I want to put a new Starbucks in Salt Lake City. Where do I put it? Seems like a simple question. The answer is really complicated to get to. But you can use generative AI to ask that question and get an answer out of it. You don't need an analyst in the middle. You don't need to go search for data. You don't need to know which geoprocessing algorithms to do the work. It's done magically for you. That's a huge change, and that will really transform the geospatial industry. It'll take a lot of analysts out of the picture. It will mean that people start actually thinking more deeply about which problems they want to solve and move beyond thinking about 2D maps. And don't get me started there. So that's AI and generative AI. Augmented reality through these smart glasses. Smart glasses and this Vision Pro is a new interface. So we have a laptop like I'm talking to you on here, or a monitor. We've got an iPhone, which is a different interface, a different way to access information. Then we've got computer in our eyes, essentially, with smart glasses. So we're bringing everything closer to our brain. And what we're looking at, which is really the tie into geospatial, is what we'll be asking questions of. So I can put smart glasses on and I can ask a question about something I'm looking at. That question would be me asking the glasses, and generative AI of sorts would be answering that question for me. I'd be talking essentially instead of typing into ChatGPT through the glasses. So easy access to ask the question, an easy way to get the information back into my eyes. It's what I'm looking at. Well, guess what? What I'm looking at has got a location. So there's a direct tie into the geospatial world. So the geospatial world and GIS is potentially the back end to a chunk of what's going to happen with these new interfaces. So I think that's incredible. It's amazing, going to be an amazing change in a relatively short period of time. If you follow my LinkedIn posts, you'll see me talking a lot about this stuff. The next piece and the last piece is augmented reality. So it's where we're merging the real world with the digital world. So a simple example is I'm an architect. I just designed a building. It's on a piece of paper. I've digitized it. Now I'm going to put it into the real world and I'm going to see it through my glasses. So that spot in the ground where that's been dug away, where the building's going to go, I can go look at that now. I can walk around it. I can see the shadow. I could walk inside of it. And if I've got a BIM model, if it's a BIM model, I can see the interior. So, you know, we're entering a new world for spatial that ties directly into geospatial, and I think that the niche industry that has been and poorly understood industry that's geospatial is about to be revolutionized and see enormous growth with the expansion through this whole world of spatial computing. So I went long. It's about 16 minutes. Apologies, I don't usually like to do long videos, but I think that's for the financial community and those looking to invest in this space. Feel free to reach back to me. It's a very, very complicated space. There are lots of moving parts. There's lots of sectors. There's lots of companies involved in different sectors. There's lots of different business models. There's lots of complementary pieces that are coming together. And there's a brand new world that's emerging, which provides enormous opportunities, investment opportunities. So love to answer your questions if you've got more questions, but I hope this talk gave you sort of a 80,000 foot view on what is quite a complicated world. I will say thanks for surviving 15 minutes of me talking. I'll do another one of these soon. Cheers.